Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining me in this next episode of the podcast, Miracle of Reconciliation. Um, my hope is that you find encouragement from the unfolding chapters of my story of reconciliation. Again, I'm not an expert in this area or think that I have it all together, but I do know what it's like to feel brokenness and to sometimes feel, betrayal. But I also know what it's like to experience the miracle of reconciliation and have seen what God can do when people are willing to humble their hearts and let Him lead them, right? So I appreciate you joining me in this journey as we share stories and discover the healing hope that's found in the power of Jesus Christ. So today I want to talk to you guys about what filters to use, or I should say, what filters I've used to identify toxic barriers in my life. In the previous couple of episodes, we talked about how I discovered, after doing some self evaluation and trying to let the Holy Spirit convict me of areas to grow in, I realized that there were toxic barriers I had set up in my life that I thought were healthy boundaries. And they look alike on the surface, but when you start digging into the root, you realize they're very different. So, in the previous episode, we talked about 4 filters that I use to try to kind of identify healthy boundaries. And of course, it's not a foolproof plan. I'm not an expert in that. Those are just kind of practical things that have helped me, because I feel like it's better to do something imperfectly than to not do anything right and to not even try. So, those were 4 filters that I've been trying to, use to distinguish what is a healthy boundary in my life. And we talked about that. Today we're going to talk about 4 filters I use to identify toxic barriers in my life, because I realize that I actually have a whole bunch of them. But before I go into that, I want to recommend a book that I've been reading that has been super helpful for me. So it's a book by Dr. Henry Cloud. It's called Changes That Heal: 4 Practical Steps to a Happy, Healthier You. And the reason that this book covers a wide range of things, but the reason I recommend it is because it covers the brokenness that we feel from other people, and it talks about boundaries. So Dr. Henry Cloud, he's one of my favorite Christian therapist leaders. He has tons of content out there. In fact, I'm subscribed to a program that he has called Boundaries. It's a paid subscription that has benefited me tremendously. I think it's well worth paying for. So that's even another resource. If you want to check that out, you can go to boundaries.me, and there's lots of helpful information there if you do want an expert's opinion, because again, I'm not an expert in this. But if you want someone who is a professional to give you real insights, then I definitely recommend his book, Changes That Heal. It's been super impactful for me. So in this podcast, I want to talk about 4 filters that I've been using for myself to help me identify toxic barriers. Because again, healthy boundaries keep the bad stuff from coming into your life. Toxic barriers keep the good stuff from coming into your life. So it's important to realize the difference between the two. So these are the 4 filters that I use. The first filter for me, just trying to identify what a toxic barrier is I've realized they put processes over people. They put a system in place of a person, and what happens is that a belief, a system, a process, a structure becomes more sacred than a human life, essentially. And what happens, at least for me, and what I've been guilty of, is I become so mission minded on a particular project, or as a Christian, I become so mission minded on, we have got to reach people for Jesus. We have got to excel in evangelism, in community outreach. We need to do whatever it takes to make this happen, to make this ministry work. And what I've done is a lot of times I use people to sort of support the ministry. And really, the way it should be is that the ministry is there to support the people. That's why a ministry exists, because people are at the heart of it. So I think what I've been guilty of is I become so mission minded. I become so focused on, we need to accomplish this thing. We need to have this ministry. We need to have this program. Or in the business world, it's, this project needs to be done by this time, and it needs to be perfect. That really, I start to trample people. And when you begin to damage relationships with people at the expense of a project or a program or a ministry, that really is a toxic barrier. There's nothing really healthy about that. So that's one of the things I filter through, is think, okay, is this response to this person putting my preference, my processes over this person? Am I scaling this project over this person? Am I downsizing that? So that's one filter I use. The second filter that I use is realizing that for toxic barriers, relationships are expendable. Um, so at any given time, if I, and this is why in the first podcast of this series I said that our culture is so egotistical. Like we are in such a narcissistic culture, because I have literally seen within the last few years, especially in the outcome of COVID, when people were super isolated from their family and friends, what I have seen are family members literally sacrificing other family members because of some kind of grievance or disagreement. I'm not even talking about because they were abused, or that's different. So I don't want us to get mixed up with that. I'm talking about people who uh, don't agree with someone's lifestyle or their worldview or their particular religion or how they handled, the health crisis of COVID, and they're willing to cut a family member off. And I've seen family members literally estranged from other family members because of these toxic barriers that were happening. And that can happen. If you hang out with a toxic person or you're hanging out with a toxic group of people, you begin to look at relationships as expendable and say, you know what, I don't need that family member in my life anymore. I don't need those friends in my life anymore. Or if somebody disagrees with you or challenges you in your workplace, your ego can get in the way and think, you know what, if you're not going to get on board with me, then I don't have any, reservations about ending this relationship. And that's a very ego driven attitude to have. So, toxic barriers look at relationships not as assets that are worth investing in over the course of time, right? Toxic barriers don't look at friendships as something as being valuable and sacred and worth saving. Instead, toxic barriers look at people as being expendable. Like at any time, I can drop you. I don't have any issues with that, and we'll cut ties. So that's one of the things I've been looking for is, have I put an idea or a belief over the friendship of somebody? And like I shared in the first podcast, I have a tendency where if someone says something on social media that I disagree with or goes against what I believe, it's easy for me to unfriend them. It's easy for me to cut ties with them. Um, it's sad how in our day and age, it's sad how easy it is to take a friendship that you've poured in for years or sometimes decades and end it with the click of a button. It's heartbreaking that that's the case. That's the world we live in. Relationships that we've poured so much into, it's easy to just cut ties with them. So that's one of the filters I look at when I'm trying to distinguish if something is a toxic barrier in my life is, thinking through, okay, is this friendship expendable? Am I willing to cut this person off just because they disagree with me or they've challenged me or something like that? Now, the third filter, this is an important one. The third filter is that toxic barriers create isolation. So, in the previous podcast, we talked about how healthy boundaries for me, they create margin in my life. They allow me to prioritize things, and they actually create health. They prohibit anxiety. They allow me to thrive as a person. With toxic barriers, they're different because they make you more isolated from other people, and that filter in a lot of ways weaves in with how relationships are expendable, because you isolate yourself from family members, you isolate yourself from friends, and that's when like I've talked to people. I was talking to a family the other day who says that their daughter won't talk to the parents. They've totally estranged this daughter, and her family have totally estranged herself from this parents. Like, she'll talk to her younger brother, but she won't talk to the rest of the family. She's just totally estranged them. She's totally isolated herself. And I can't give any professional input on why that happens. Again, there's lots of resources out there that explain why that takes place. But I do know that a toxic barrier isolates you. It isolates you from the people who care about you. And I think what's sad, especially in churches, and I'm not even thinking of any particular church in general or specifically, but just the church in general, from stories that I've heard from people and things that I've experienced, it's heartbreaking because when you have someone who's dealing with ego problems, they tend to isolate themselves from the comrades, the teammates, the people who have been serving alongside them for years, who are trying to help them achieve the vision that God's given them. But that leader can't get over that ego tendency, so they begin to isolate themselves. They begin to cut that relationship off, and it's heartbreaking. But that's one of the filters, I think, of a toxic barrier, is that you begin to isolate yourself from people, or you begin to isolate them from the process. It reminds me of I don't know if any of you guys have seen The Office, but it's mine and Lizzie's favorite, one of our favorite shows. But there's an episode after Michael Scott has left the company, and D'Angelo, who's played by Will Ferrell, comes in and he's kind of taking over the company, and he has this group of people that are kind of his secret core group, like secret club, secret meeting, and there's only specific people who are involved in it. And it's kind of a toxic group, and the rest of the office, Pam and Phyllis and all the others are concerned about some of the outcomes of this toxic group. So Jim Halbert, one of the guys who's a part of this group, he decides he's going to try to address the issue with the boss, and he's like, people are talking, there's concerns and everything that are going on, and immediately the boss goes on the defense. He's like, whoa, who's saying, you got it all wrong. Well, the outcome of that is that now, because Jim has addressed concerns, he's not allowed into the group. So at one point in one of the scenes, the secret group is meeting in the office, and Jim tries to go in, and everyone just like stares at him, and they're like, can I help you? Like, you got reason for being here? So they're like isolating him from this secret little toxic group, because he challenged them, because he raised a concern. Um, so even though it's a funny episode and kind of a light example, um, it that happens. It's true that things like that happen when you have a toxic barrier in your life. It's easy to create isolation. It's easy to isolate. You'll either isolate yourself, or we'll isolate those people from our lives. We'll keep them at a distance. So that's the third filter. And then the fourth and last filter that I use to try to identify toxic barriers in my life is that a toxic barrier is almost always emotionally reactive. Um, when I think about a healthy boundaries respond in love. Toxic barriers react from our anger and really from our egos. So when someone has challenged me, it's very easy for me to take the road more traveled and react emotionally. When someone challenges something that I'm doing, or they try to address a behavior or raise a concern, it's very easy for me to feel like they're attacking my character, or coming after me personally, or coming after my family. And if that's the case, I'll react emotionally. So instead of trying to have a meaningful conversation and actually think, okay, is there something I need to learn from? Is there something I need to do in this situation? A potential change that I need to make. I'm kind of coming at this from, how dare you? How dare you challenge me? Do you know who I am? Do you know how many years of experience I've had in this area? Uh, you don't know anything. So it's easy to react emotionally. Um, it's easy when people try to ask us clarifying questions. And I've had people try to get clarity, like, why are you doing this, Isaac? What went into this decision? Um, why do you feel the need to go this route with this particular situation? And it's easy for me to think, oh, they're questioning my character. Um, and then to to react emotionally would be to say, well, because I said so, because I'm the boss, because this is what I get paid to do, or this is my job, and your job is to do things this way and to follow me blindly. I don't know what the scenario would be, but that can happen. Um, it's easy for people to react emotionally. Um, and I know in future podcasts we'll definitely talk about how to handle things in a more healthy way, how I'm learning to handle things in a healthier way, because you don't have to react based off of your ego, based off of frustration. That's what damages relationships. That's what causes rifts in friendships. That's what destroys companies. That's what splits up churches and shuts them down, honestly. So it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to react emotionally. And in future podcasts, we'll talk about how to deal with conflict in a healthy way, and how I'm working through that, and some of the things that I've done for my life, and what I'm learning from other people and what I'm reading about. Um, but that's one of the traits of a toxic barrier, is that they're emotionally reactive. So this is my encouragement to you. Um, Take some time wherever you're at and pray through these things and just say, God, I know this is an imperfect filter of what could be going on in my heart. So, along with your word, which is priority in my life, help me to recognize the toxic barriers in my life. Help me to recognize and to distinguish between a toxic barrier and a healthy boundary. And Lord, help me to replace maybe those toxic barriers with healthy boundaries. Help me to know when to put distance between me and a toxic person, so that I can create margin in my life and thrive. And help me to know when to remove a toxic barrier from my life, which might be destroying people and sabotaging my ability to grow as a person. So that's my encouragement to you. I hope you gain some kind of practical step out of that. Again, as always, take these podcasts with a grain of salt, because I'm not coming at this from an expert's point of view, and I recognize that there are so many people out there who can shed more light on this from a professional standpoint. In fact, if you guys need recommendations on Christian counselors or Christian therapists who can address these and unpack these for you guys in a professional way, I know there's a couple of people I know that I can connect you with. So again, this isn't me saying this is the way you need to do things. These are the changes you need to make. These are really filters and things that I'm realizing about myself as I go through this journey of self-evaluation and trying to allow the Holy Spirit to speak into my life. So appreciate you guys for watching this podcast. Look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Until then, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.